America is the most powerful country in human history. But 423 years ago, the land it sits on was completely irrelevant. No roads, no cities, no country, just wilderness and people who had already called it home for thousands of years. So how did a few desperate settlements become the most dominant nation on Earth? The answer is stranger than you think. It's 1607. Spain has been looting the Americas for a century. Britain has been watching, and Britain is done watching. So they send a group of investors, not explorers, investors, to plant a permanent colony in Virginia. They land on a swampy, mosquito-infested riverbank. They call it Jamestown. Within a year, 2/3 of them are dead. Jamestown should have disappeared forever. One plant changed everything. A single colonist discovered that Virginia's soil grew tobacco better than almost anywhere on Earth, and Europe couldn't get enough of it. Overnight, a dying colony became a cash machine. Profitable things attract people. People built more colonies, and more came, and more and more. Up north, a different kind of settler arrived in 1620. The Pilgrims weren't chasing money, they were escaping religious persecution in England. They landed at Plymouth, Massachusetts, in the middle of winter. Half of them died before spring. The other half kept going. By the mid-1600s, Britain had 13 colonies stretched across the entire East Coast. Each had different rules, different cultures, different people. But they all had one thing in common. They were owned by Britain. Now open a map of North America in 1750. Britain controlled the coastline. France controlled almost everything else. A territory stretching from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to Canada. For a while, everyone tolerated each other. Then, in 1754, that ended. France and Britain went to war for control of the continent. France had fewer settlers, but they had powerful alliances with indigenous nations. Britain had more soldiers and more money. 7 years of brutal fighting. Britain won. France lost Canada. France lost the Ohio Valley. France lost 3 million square kilometers of territory. The map was redrawn overnight. Britain now dominated North America, but winning that war cost an enormous amount of money. And Britain had a plan to get it back. Hey, colonies, you know that expensive war we just won for you? Yeah, thanks. We're going to need you to help pay for it. New taxes, new regulations. Decisions made in London by people who had never even set foot in America. The colonists said no. Protests became boycotts. Boycotts became confrontations. Confrontations became gunfire. April 19th, 1775. The first shots of the American Revolution. July 4th, 1776. 13 colonies declared independence from Britain. Bold move, they had no real army, no navy, no money, and they were about to fight the most powerful military on Earth. But they had France. Still furious about the last war, France funded the American Rebellion just to watch Britain bleed. It worked. By 1783, Britain recognized American independence. The United States of America was real. Except now what? 13 colonies had spent years united against something. Now they had to be united for something. That turned out to be much harder. The first government collapsed almost immediately. States behaved like separate countries. They refused to cooperate. The federal government couldn't properly collect taxes. It couldn't enforce laws. The whole system was falling apart. So in 1787, the founders made a radical decision. They scrapped everything and started over. They wrote the Constitution. A real federal government, a president, a Congress, a Supreme Court, enough central authority to keep the country from falling apart. In 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States. The country was still tiny. Everything west of the Mississippi was still up for grabs. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, another man was changing history. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. He had taken control of France and was building the largest European empire of his generation. He wanted America, too. He pressured Spain into giving Louisiana back to France. Not just a city, an enormous territory covering more than 2.1 million square kilometers, right through the middle of North America. The Americans panicked. If Napoleon controlled the Mississippi River, he could choke American trade almost overnight. So the United States made a simple offer. They asked to buy New Orleans. Napoleon stopped to think. He was preparing for another massive war against Britain. He desperately needed money. and he knew he couldn't realistically defend such a huge territory from across the Atlantic. So he made one of the most surprising deals in history. He didn't sell New Orleans. He sold everything, all 2.1 million square kilometers, for just $15 million. America needed land. Napoleon needed cash. Both sides got exactly what they wanted. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 instantly doubled the size of the United States. Almost overnight, the map of America changed forever. Americans looked west and saw forests, mountains, rivers, open plains, and endless opportunity. So they started moving toward it. One problem: the land wasn't empty. Hundreds of indigenous nations had lived across North America for generations. They had their own governments, cultures, languages, and trade networks long before Europeans arrived. The United States wanted the land anyway. Its solution was systematic and brutal. In 1830, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act. Entire nations, including the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, were forced from their ancestral homes. Families were marched west at gunpoint. Thousands died from disease, hunger, and exhaustion before reaching their destination. History remembers it as the Trail of Tears. While that was happening, another opportunity was unfolding farther south. American settlers had been moving into Texas, which at the time belonged to Mexico. Ironically, Mexico had invited many of them in, hoping they would help develop the region. Instead, the plan backfired. By 1835, American settlers actually outnumbered Mexicans in Texas. Tensions exploded. The settlers revolted. They defeated the Mexican army. Then they declared Texas an independent republic. Not long afterward, they asked to join the United States. In 1845, America accepted. Mexico refused to recognize the annexation. To Mexico, Texas was still Mexican territory. The disagreement quickly became a war. 2 years later, the United States won. The peace treaty transformed the map of North America once again. Mexico gave up California, Nevada, Utah, most of Arizona, most of New Mexico, and parts of Colorado. In return, the United States paid $15 million. The country had become dramatically larger. Then history intervened once again. In 1848, gold was discovered in California. The news spread around the world almost overnight. Hundreds of thousands of people rushed west hoping to become rich. Some succeeded. Most didn't. But the gold rush permanently transformed California. Its population exploded. New towns became cities. Roads, businesses, and railroads followed. The American frontier was no longer just expanding. It was accelerating. But something far more dangerous was growing inside the country. For decades, the North and the South had been moving in completely different directions. The South's economy depended on enslaved labor. By 1860, nearly 4 million enslaved people were working on plantations across the southern states. The North was becoming increasingly industrial. Factories were replacing farms. Its economy no longer depended on slavery in the same way. Every time a new state joined the Union, the same question returned. Would it allow slavery, or would it ban it? The country became more divided every year. Then came the election of 1860. Abraham Lincoln became president. He opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories. For many Southern leaders, that was enough. They didn't wait to see what would happen next. 11 states left the Union. Together, they formed the Confederate States of America. In April 1861, the Civil War began. Nobody expected it to become the deadliest conflict in American history. It lasted 4 long years. Entire cities were destroyed. Railroads became military lifelines. Industry powered the North. Agriculture struggled in the South. Battle after battle left the country exhausted. More than 620,000 Americans lost their lives. More than in all other American wars until that point combined. When the fighting finally ended in 1865, the Union survived. Slavery was abolished. The country remained one nation, but the scars would last for generations. After the war, America looked outward once again. In 1867, the United States bought Alaska from Russia. The price was just $7.2 million. Many Americans laughed. They called it Seward's Folly, a frozen wilderness, a complete waste of money. Then prospectors found gold. Later, enormous reserves of oil. The purchase suddenly looked like a bargain. America kept expanding. In 1898, an American warship exploded in Havana Harbor. The exact cause has never been proven, but the United States blamed Spain. War followed. It lasted only 4 months. Spain was defeated. The United States gained control of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Cuba became independent but under strong American influence. Almost overnight, the United States had become an overseas power. Then another crisis erupted across the Atlantic. In 1914, Europe descended into the First World War. At first, America stayed out of the fighting. For nearly 3 years, it remained neutral. Then German submarines began sinking American ships. In 1917, the United States entered the war. Just 18 months later, it was over. The Allies had won. Back home, the economy boomed. The 1920s became known as the Roaring Twenties. Factories expanded. Cities grew. Jazz filled the streets. The stock market climbed higher and higher. It looked unstoppable. It wasn't. On October 29, 1929, the market collapsed. Banks failed. Businesses closed. Millions of Americans lost everything. Unemployment reached 25%. The Great Depression would last for an entire decade. December 7th, 1941. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. In a single morning, the United States was pulled into the Second World War. The response was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Factories that had been producing cars began producing tanks, aircraft, and warships. Millions of civilians went to work supporting the war effort. More than 16 million Americans served in uniform. The United States fought on two sides of the planet at the same time. In Europe, alongside Britain and the Soviet Union, American forces helped push Nazi Germany back across the continent. In the Pacific, they fought island by island against Imperial Japan. The war reshaped the entire world. In May 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered. Just 3 months later, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered soon afterward. The deadliest war in human history was finally over. When the smoke cleared, only 2 true superpowers remained: the United States and the Soviet Union. The next conflict would look very different. For the next 45 years, they competed for global influence without ever declaring war on each other. It became known as the Cold War. The competition spread across the world. Korea, Vietnam, Cuba, Africa, the Middle East, even space became a battlefield. In 1969, the United States landed the first humans on the moon. It wasn't just a scientific achievement. It was a political message to the entire world. America had reached a place no civilization had ever reached before. Then, in 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. 2 years later, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War was over. For the first time in modern history, one nation stood above every other. The United States had become the world's only superpower. 423 years. From a dying tobacco colony built beside a swamp to the most influential nation on Earth. None of it was guaranteed. A single cash crop saved Jamestown. A revolution that should have failed somehow succeeded. One desperate deal doubled the size of the country. A civil war nearly destroyed it. 2 world wars transformed it. History could have turned in a different direction at almost every step, but it didn't. And that's how a handful of fragile colonies became the most powerful country in human history. The story still isn't over. The next chapter is already being written. Subscribe and let's find out where history goes next.